You are listening to Methods Build What's Next Digital Product Perspectives, presented by Global Logic. At Method, we aim to bridge the gap between technology and humanity for a more seamless digital future. Join us as we uncover insights, best practices, and cutting-edge technologies with top industry leaders that can help you and your organization craft better digital products and experiences.
Well, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Build What's Next. Really excited about the conversation that we're going to have today with Rashev. Margo flew in from Chicago to talk to us, and we've been talking a lot about product lately and insights and measurement and AI. But one of the things that I'm most passionate about, and I've had an opportunity to work with, is customer experience. And especially today, we want to look at the intersection of customer experience, insights, UXR, and product. And how that world is changing and evolving. And so really excited. Welcome to the show. Margo, would you give just a little bit of your background, I think, and especially being both an insights and a product person here a little bit?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and to have this conversation. Super exciting topic as well. I'm currently based in Chicago, and I currently lead Medallia product pillar. That's called Listen, which is all the ways that we listen to our customer feedback, which includes all the direct, indirect, all the different channels, all the way the customers interact with the brands. And then we analyze it and we act on it. But anyway, I lead the Listen product pillar right now. And my background, I'm relatively new to product. I've been in product for the past 2 years. Before that, I was pretty much spend most of my career on the go-to-market side. So I've been in a lot of startup companies, and that's been my passion for my entire life. And now, of course, part of the big company, but very exciting part of the company where we can operate as a startup within a big company. Anyway, very exciting space.
Yeah, and you've shared some of the exciting innovation work. I think we're going to draw on both aspects of your background today, and I guess maybe the first thing, in terms of the intersection of customer experience teams and product teams, especially with the work that you guys do, right? And I don't think I work with any product team or design team that doesn't want more data on their customers and what they're doing. Like, how do you see those worlds coming together? And then I'd love for you to share a little bit around, how you're seeing insights evolve in general in the industry right now as well.
Well, there's a lot of really exciting things here to unpack. In terms of how insights evolve in the industry in general, we are seeing a big shift right now happening with how brands are used to ask questions all the time. Ask. And now we're seeing a big shift from all the data that brands currently have about their customers, being able to put it all together and understand what customer needs and wants are before even asking any question. So this ability to put all of this together, understand before asking, and when you do need to ask, you ask in the right moment with the right context in the right channel to get the most valuable feedback. So we're seeing this shift right now happening, which is really exciting. And in terms of the product and CX overlap, we're also seeing that a lot of silos that everyone has been talking about breaking down is actually happening right now at a more rapid pace. So we're seeing more product realizing how much insights CX teams already have about the customers talking about different products that they use, how they use it, what do they like about them, what do they don't like about them. And that in combination with the metrics that we already track in product, which is usage, utilization, and how we're able to connect it to the business impact, is very exciting how these things start to come together. But another thing that I see a lot of overlap is actually foundationally when you think about these two functions within the organization, the customer insights and product. We had Will Gudara, who is the author of The Unreasonable Hospitality, speak at our recent conference. And he talked about this idea that fads fade in cycles, but the human desire to be taken care of never goes away. So if you think foundational in terms of what CX at the core cares about and what product cares about at the core is we want to make our customers happy. So when we connect those two, we find the common foundation. And now it's just a matter of figuring out how can we connect our metrics and how we operate together and how we complement each other to drive growth.
Yeah, I mean, there's to your point, there's a lot to unpack there, and I think it's so fascinating. If I think back, earlier in my career, there were certain clients where we were doing both product and product development work for them, but then their CX team would hire us to do journey mapping and persona work and archetype work. And I remember the big aha moment for me was, when I was on the product side of the house, right? We had so much work to do that for that client, such a big who doesn't have an 18-month backlog, right? That, it was so hard for them to take in this new information all the time because they were already felt so overwhelmed. But then for the CX team, we would find these really big aha moments about something or these opportunities to innovate. But then we'd take them to the product team and they said, unless you've got a couple developers hiding in that journey map, we don't really care about it because we're at capacity already. So I think it's been really hard for organizations to kind of synchronize the rhythm of business of the people who are listening to the customers and the people who are preparing those feedback loops as a way of maturing that. And especially now, I see a lot of companies, trying to stretch a dollar a little bit further, trying to stretch their teams a little bit further. And whether it's the product team being asked to do more, the UXR team being asked to do more, or, CX teams have to cover such a wide area. It's really hard to make sure that the right insights get to the right people to make those decisions. And I think, you mentioned this earlier at lunch of, making sure the right kind of insight gets to the right person. So, I mean, how do you think about that of making sure, or maybe like advice to the product team that what their CX team probably knows that they would benefit from? Like, how do you think about making sure those insights get to the product team from a CX standpoint?
That's a great question. Yeah, so a couple things here. I think when the idea that CX teams have such a rich understanding of the customer needs is there, right? And I think that we're seeing a natural progression in terms of how this kind of functions are starting to merge. But when you think about the product development lifecycle and how we build our roadmaps and how we think about prioritizing initiatives, that voice of the customer is so critical, right? Because on the product side, we are doing this work on our own. We're doing discovery, we're doing the research, we're doing the UXR. We're already doing all of this. But we're seeing it in this kind of a very limited space. But when you connect with CX teams, you realize they have this wide array of data on all of the customers and all of their key priorities. This is where I think that connecting the data will help product teams not only ideate on ideas, but also prioritize what's going to be really important.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I think what is critical is for both functions to understand what is the business impact, right? CX, we're seeing a huge shift right now from moving away from score tracking to understanding what does it mean for the business? What does it mean for customer churn? What does it mean for the growth levers of the organizations? And then we're already doing this in product. So connecting those things together, I think is a really exciting shift that's happening.
Yeah. And you started to go there already, so I will follow. But, talk about, the difference in what's in the CX metric toolkit versus the product metric toolkit a little bit more. And we can get into some specific things. And I think this is such a rich space where there's so much misunderstood at times around like what these different metrics mean and how to use them and how to incorporate them. So, but I think it's a place where both sides have a lot to learn from each other, potentially, as you just went into. And, building on one thing you said, I think that's one of the things that we see in design projects a lot where, you go do and user research, right? You're going to talk to, 5, 10, 20, 30 people, right? Maybe you run a specific survey. But I see so many teams when they do that, the results of that become their truth. And there is no kind of historical context where they're saying, okay, what is our existing set of beliefs that we're using this research to update those beliefs? And I think that's where the CX team has kind of that historical view. They have the view of the entire relationship. And one of my favorite quotes, I forget who I stole it from, but is that, the difference between CX and UX is your users are always customers, but your customers aren't always users because there's stuff going on for the customer with your brand outside of that user experience. And I think as product people, it's easy to forget where those journeys start when it doesn't involve our product sometimes, and CX can kind of connect those dots and tell the story. But let's dive into some specifics because I think what you said is really interesting of we're seeing this evolution of, kind of sentiment tracking to more deep understanding. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you look at the CX function historically, a lot of the metrics have been kind of centered on tracking NPS and OSAT.
Hmm.
There were easy metrics to track. They made sense for many, many, many years. And they're still really good metrics, but they're not telling you the whole picture, right? You need to understand what is driving your NPS and OSAT. You need to understand from what are the key drivers, what is going to have the most business impact on more business metrics like retention, cost to serve, lifetime value of the customer, right? So connecting CX metrics to the business outcome is critical. Um, and then for the product teams, this is where we're already doing this and learning from the CX, for example. We can say, when we look at our roadmap or when we look at the backlog of, the features that customers have requested through the PEQs that are coming into our product board, right now, just looking at the volume of the features or the specific topics that come in as the key features or the type of customer is giving you also a part of the picture.
Yeah.
But having an understanding of what are the key frustration items for the customers at a scale can give you much more context on being able to prioritize what's going to truly drive impact in terms of feature prioritization and ideation stages. So I think this is where it starts coming together in a really powerful way.
Yeah. And it's interesting there. And you hit on an important point, which is these are valuable metrics, but none of them tell the whole story. And I think that's where a lot of teams struggle and get lost. We were talking about books at lunch and talking about Effortless Experience, which is one of my favorite books in the space. And, a lot of insights from that book and other things I see, right, is there's a very particular type of person that leaves a bad review. There's a very particular type of person that fills out an NPS survey, and there's many that don't. There's a very particular type of person that requests a product feature. Funny enough, for the first time, as a complete aside, I filled out a survey for a product I love this morning. It was the first time I've done it in a while, and they asked me if I would be willing to do user research, and I said yes, just because I want to kind of. Sometimes it gets boring being on one side of it, and I want someone to interview me for once, But so I guess maybe that was a little interview prep for today of taking I couldn't tell if it came from the CX or the product team who asked me for the survey, but I think people get lost in that when we're talking to companies these days, intake prioritization and road mapping is probably one of the most popular topics. And, all of those things inform the roadmap, but none of them can, dictate the roadmap. And I think people want these listening posts they have set up to tell them what to do. But there's so much noise in this of, especially, NPS over the last couple of years. Everyone does NPS now. And so customers are just oversaturated in seeing it and being overwhelmed by it a lot of times. And, doing NPS for a B2B company versus a B2C company, very different context in managing that. And so the point about, hey, making sure you understand what the data is actually saying, can you ask the question to get down to the root cause of analysis? And I think that's what's exciting right now is, especially with AI coming along, we can start to parse all of this unstructured data and kind of source data and understanding that. And so I did segue into, we can't have a podcast in 2025 without talking about AI and its impact. How are you seeing AI potentially impact the insights industry? But then also, how are you seeing it not impact the AI the industry? Talk a little bit about that.
Very interesting topic. We have to talk about AI, of course, right now. No conversation actually happens without this topic.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I think we live in a very, very exciting times. And that's one of the things that excites me about being in product right now and R&D. There's so much innovation that's happening right now in this space in all the different areas and different verticals and industries and different types of applications for the AI. But I think when it comes to the insights and how AI can help, I think a lot of what we have seen over the past 2-3 years have been hyped up, right? And we're seeing that coming up right now in a lot of the headlines with MIT research showing that 95% of the AI projects don't get past the pilot stage.
Yep.
Right. So that was really interesting data is coming up right now that is showing that a lot of it has been hyped up.
Mm-hmm.
So the people who were thinking that AI is going to take everyone's jobs in like 2 years, it's probably not going to happen.
Yeah.
But we're seeing that very healthy correction right now in terms of
Mhm.
understanding the most valuable use cases. And a lot of it right now, at least today, we don't know what's going to happen 30 days from now or 6 months from now. The field is evolving so fast. But at least for now, we're seeing a lot of improvement on and optimization on the tasks that humans don't like doing, right? So I would say that this is the biggest application right now of AI in a lot of organizations. Like, how do we optimize some of those operational tasks that humans don't want to do? But again, throwing AI at a messy data set is not going to solve your problem. So
Yeah.
this is what the results of the MIT research is showing, that just to have AI on top of a messy organizational structure or lack of processes or a messy data set is not going to help you. It's going to make things worse.
Yeah.
So I think this is a really good reset moment for us right now, understanding how fast the technology is evolving and what are all the different capabilities of what we can do. We need to look back at the foundations and understand how we're currently operating, how we're talking to each other, what are the business problems we're trying to solve.
Yeah.
We're having a lot of these conversations right now in the product. You don't need AI to solve every single solution that you want to build in product. Sometimes it's about automation. You don't need agents for everything. Sometimes it's just automation.
Yeah.
So what is the problem that you're trying to solve? Going back to the foundations, and how do you want to solve it? And AI potentially may be an application. It can help you speed up research. It can get you more insights, deeper insights, especially on a large scale conversational data. That's what AI is really good at. But there's a lot of things that AI is not great at.
Yeah.
So I think setting this foundation, very strong foundation in the beginning, is critical right now as we prepare to advance to a new level.
Yeah. No, I mean, completely agree. And obviously, we do a lot of customer research for our clients. So, we're playing with it with the ability to take interview transcripts and do that theming and everything. But I've had some interesting conversations with colleagues where, I've seen, sometimes AI overdoes it. It comes up with too many insights and it's too long and it almost, you kind of like lose the context, you lose prioritization, right? I think there's been other studies that have come up showing that it negatively impacts critical reasoning for certain people if they end up over relying on it. So I do think it's a delicate balancing act, especially in this case of where I do think there's still such a important role for a strong craftsman, kind of going back to what you said about hospitality, that can really, really deeply empathize with customers and segments and understanding those differences, but thinking about like how that turns into a product and a product vision, because you can't solve everyone's problems in product. There's always going to be, people who complain. Talking about NPS, I was doing a workshop with a client one time and they were talking about their OKRs, and one of the OKRs was, raise our NPS by 10 or 15%. I said, okay, what's your NPS? And they said something like 80. Or it was like
That's pretty high.
It was
That's good.
That's what I said. It was like the highest I've ever heard. And I said, why? And they're like, because we want to improve customer experience. And I said, why? And they said, well, you just want to improve that metric. I said, do you have retention problems? They said, no. I said, well, let's pick a different metric. Let's go after something else. Because
is revenue not growing?
it wasn't solving a business outcome for them. And so I think it's very easy for some of this data, some of these metrics to become the hero. And especially with AI, if people kind of lose track of where the data came from and the ability to kind of translate it and become too reliant on it. On the flip side, I do think, AI is not only going to help us with that data, but it's creating new data for us, and data that didn't used to be data is now. This podcast wouldn't have been data 10 years ago, but now it's technically data. We'll see how good and structured and maybe semi-structured data.
Right now you can do a AI podcast, right? Like you
Exactly.
don't even need to have a human. The AI can do a podcast for you.
But now, I think to your point, one of the things that I've always looked for when I've done product work in the past is, even if I'm working on a digital experience, going to the call center and going to call center data and trying to figure out, all right, what can I see around what issues people are calling about, and I think that's one of the saddest things for product and CX sometimes is like the call center data has been such a silo from product teams in the past. And so I do think there's all these data sources in an organization, whether it's business analytics, CX analytics, call center analytics, for locations that have, stores, kind of store feedback, employee feedback, that, if product teams can incorporate those signals into their rhythm, to your point around how they're thinking about their roadmap, they'll be able to be a lot more precise on just what they're trying to solve for. And you used the word friction earlier, but I think so much of good customer experience is just removing the bad from it versus trying to delight. And, delight has its place and its time and that type of thing. But anything else that you're excited about when it comes to AI and insights that you're thinking about?
I think this idea of being able to be proactive, to be able to see all the data across operations, contact center, marketing, product, legal, all the operational data, understanding that and being able to be proactive, not only measuring the experience, but orchestrating the experience.
Mm-hmm.
So the shift from the CX function to say, we measure how we deliver experience, but also being able to deliver a great experience before actually measuring the experience. I think that's becoming really powerful. But at the same time, you kind of have to look at it like, when you look at the innovation curve, you're going to have brands that make this huge shift and understand the value of building the right foundation to be able to connect all these data sets. And it's going to be some of the top brands that are ready to do this, that are willing to take the leap, to take a leap. And maybe 1 or 2% of all the brands will be there. These brands that are innovators in the space and are not afraid to take the leap to make this huge structural change in how they operate and how they ingest insights, they're going to be the ones who are going to be the first one to prove the ROI, because this is where the business is coming down. A lot of the times when a CX team or a product team is asking for an investment, show me the ROI, right?
Yeah.
And this is where we are in this really exciting moment where some of the leading organizations are already doing this. We're starting to see some of this ROI coming in. And this is where I think we're going to start over the next couple of years seeing a little bit more adoption of the AI functionality at a wider scale.
Yeah. You mentioned ROI and business outcomes a couple of times. One of the things I used to say about one of the difficulties of being on a CX team was often that you own nothing and you inform everything, right? Where your real customer a lot of times as a CX team is other functions in the business, because you hear all these things from customers, but then you have to convince someone else to do anything about it. You don't get to, some CX teams do, but you don't get to write the email. You don't get to pick up the phone. You don't get to prioritize the backlog. So you're kind of this master of empathy, but then also like you have to kind of work through others to be that advocate for customer vision. I guess, do you see CX teams carving out a larger role if they can kind of start bringing more of this ROI in? Or are you starting to see that shift take place at all already? Or how do you see the role of CX evolving?
I think it's a natural evolution, right? Because it's not enough to say our NPS score went up, right?
Yeah.
Like in your example with a customer that you work with, you want to be able to say, this had an impact on our retention. This had an impact on our long-term value. And when you're able to prove that, and when you're able to connect with other functions in the organizations that are already doing this,
Mm-hmm.
I think for CX, your biggest partner should be finance, right? You should be working with them 24/7, side by side, understanding the P&L, understanding growth levers, understanding all the all the metrics that are important to the business, and being able to run correlation models or being able to tie the key metrics in CX to the business outcomes is critical. And we're seeing that happening more and more. And I think that's really exciting.
Well, you heard it here first, people. Put your CX department next to your finance department at the company and magic will happen. No, I do think it's so important of having that kind of econometric model. Especially, maybe we'll pick on CSAT for a moment because we've kind of given NPS its run on this show. But, there's so many layers to these metrics, right? And the ability to segment that data and look at performance within segments or performance within products or performance within issues. And because the one thing I always tell people about CSAT or NPS is, if you're at -20, those next 20 points are pretty easy, right? Because you're just trying to avoid detractors. If you're at 40, those next 20 points are going to be like hard. And so, these metrics also have their nonlinear relationships to the amount you need to invest to improve them. And so that relationship that you talk about is really important because the bar changes. Like once you fix some of your NPS, the model probably is no longer valid in some cases. Some parts of it are going to be, but now you're probably solving a different problem. And if you can't constantly figure out what that problem is and make that business case, it becomes really hard to kind of get those initiatives funded and push through. But I do think what CX can do that others can't is they can cross boundaries in the organization really easily. You don't see a ton of product teams and call center operations teams partnering really closely, especially at larger companies because they're so far away from each other on the org chart. But CX, who can own that end-to-end experience, can kind of say like, hey, product, listen, we're getting a lot of calls about this. And it's probably downstream error from, this page or this content, or hey, marketing team, the val prop here isn't clear. And so you're overselling and you're missing this. And so it creates really unique opportunities for that. Collecting the data, listening to the data, analyzing the data is one thing. I think an underrated part of this that's really important is storytelling as well. And what do you see product teams potentially being able to learn from CX teams about, bringing insights to life and using them to kind of convince people outside of the ROI model, like, hey, we need to do something about this?
I think product teams are already doing it to a degree right now. When you talk about the UXR research, a lot of it right now with the new technology is being captured by the video technology that you can put in a show reels, right?
Yeah.
That you can tell that story. I think product teams are starting to realize the importance of telling the stories. A lot of times human beings are making emotional decisions, even though we think we want to make a logical decision. So I think that storytelling aspect is really important. And we're already doing it to a degree. And technology is allowing us to do that even more. But I think being able to work very closely together with a CX team on combining that story would make it even more impactful. And combining the business impact from what product has done to the business impact on the customer experience, because depending on the type of the organization or the vertical that you're in, some organizations' product is an experience, right?
Yeah.
Some organizations are more service heavy, or some of them is a mix. But if you're a product-led organization, then that is your experience. What you're building in the product is a huge part of your customer experience, right? So I see those functions working much more closer together right now than before.
Yeah, it's interesting because I do see that as a step that gets skipped sometimes is the storytelling nature of it. Because, you do a lot of research, right? And it comes back and it says 6 out of 10 users liked this feature idea. And there's only so much you can emotionally, even rationally or emotionally, like, is 6 good? Is 60% good? Like, what does that really mean? But being able to kind of paint that in light of a customer's journey and like why they came to the product and the problem it's trying to solve and like highlight one of those and bring to life. That's one of the things that I'm hoping, AI with the ability to kind of pull sound bites and pull video and help teams kind of put that together can help with that storytelling. Cause I feel like that's been lost sometimes. And, you go into these big planning events, right, where it's all about prioritization and breaking down our roadmap. And it's easy to feel like sometimes the the user's been left out of that room, and the customer's been left out of that room, or if they're in the room, it's very transactional. And so people talk a lot about like customer centricity and falling in love with the customer, but I think sometimes with all this data,
We forget about the customer.
yeah, it's easy for them to become data points instead of
Yeah.
people like really staying close to them, and especially for telling the story to the engineers, telling the story to other people of one of a gentleman I've had on the podcast before talks about he sends his engineers into the store just to see people and like watch them interact with the technology. And I think that's so key is, how can you bring these folks to life? And I think AI creates that opportunity. One of my consulting tricks over the years has been, if I had to deliver a user insight that I knew one of like my stakeholders were not going to like, I always delivered it as a video recording of one of their customers answering a question.
Yeah.
Because then it was, you're not going to be arguing with the consultant about if they're right. Like, hey, here's a customer. Like, let's argue with the customer instead, and like putting them front and center. And so, I do worry with all this focus on collecting all the data to make the perfect decision. Like I think that craftability of like true empathy is still so important. And I think that's one thing that, more product folks can really curate and be able to bring into their practice.
It is at the core of what how a successful product is built.
Yeah.
You need to bring your user story to life. That's what we do. We build products to solve for user problems, right? So I think it's a part of our function that we just need to remember to come back to all the time, more and more. Some of the most powerful strategies that I have built started with a user in mind, started with a quote, with a story. When I talked to the head of the insights department at the large grocery store, and they told me that this is my biggest problem. That was the beginning of my strategy.
Yeah.
So I think it's so powerful. Engineers love absolutely not being in front of customer when something breaks and there is a bug.
Yeah.
But to hear what customers' pain points are, because they get so excited in terms of how they can solve for this problem and how they can fix it and what they can build. So I think it's critical.
Yeah. And I think, that's one of the themes that we talk a lot about on the podcast is, this system of discovery and insights, and how do you integrate that a little bit more into your delivery system? Because, as an organization grows, that discovery system and the delivery system, I think there's more and more layers between where, a CX person has told a UXR person something, who's told a product person something, who's made a decision, who's handed it to a PO, who's then turned it into a requirement, who then hands it to an engineer. And you're almost like 6 or 7 layers removed from like, what's the problem we're solving, and being able to bring that back to life. I guess if you look into the future, like what are some things, over the next couple of years you hope to see in how organizations are evolving, how they interact with their users and how they bring these insights to life, and how teams kind of bring this into their rhythm?
I really hope to see that the shift that we're going through right now from just asking and understanding really evolves and really becomes table stakes for every organization in terms of how they interact with their customers and consumers. I think the period where we are right now in building the right foundation is very important, right? We need to make sure that before we throw AI at the problem, we're ready operationally to be able to execute on it and act on it and really drive business impact. And I think for us in the R&D team, it's probably one of the most exciting times because there's so much unknown right now. Nobody knows what's going to happen. We can all speculate about different ways that AI is going to have an impact on our life, our careers, and everything else that goes from that. But we can all have at the same time the impact on that development, right? Especially in R&D teams, we get to identify the business problem.
Yeah.
We get to identify what's important to solve for, and we get to build it. So I think it's a really exciting time for us. And I think the more stakeholders that we connect with, the more we work together as one team versus trying to pull into the different directions, the more successful we're going to be and the more business impact we're going to deliver.
Yeah. Well, I think you wrapped us better than I could have, but I'm gonna give it a try to kind of wrap on top of yours. I think two really powerful themes and maybe just questions that we can leave people with today, which is for product teams and design teams, um, thinking about are there questions that you're going out to ask your users or your customers that someone in the organization might already have data that could help inform your answer and would change the question you ask. I think that's really powerful. I've always loved the concept of natural experiments where, organizations that have a lot of locations or they have a franchise model or they have, silos, and they have this kind of unintentional heterogeneity of people, not running different experiments, but just running the business differently. And that's creating data that could tell us about like, hey, let's go look at all these different things we're doing and see, is it generating any data that tells us something unique about our business? I think that's like one really valuable point is what are questions you're asking today that you could rely on behaviors tomorrow and sense that. And then I think the second thing, when you talk about the kind of the foundations and the operations for a company is, if you heard something fascinating from some of your customers or a segment of customers, or there was a new need emerging from your customers tomorrow, could your organization respond to it? Like, do you have the ability to take and recognize a need as an organization, decide we should stop some of the other stuff we're doing, we should prioritize this, and we should invest in this because it's important and we're hearing this, and act on it? And, would that take you a budgetary event where you'd have to say like, well, let's put it on the docket for next year. We're gonna have to make a capital request. Would that take you going through, multiple rounds of planning where, hey, we have to go through and, build the business case and do discovery and then kind of get approval by these committees? Is that something that your teams could hear and pivot kind of in the moment of something they're designing? Could they reprioritize? I think it's a powerful question for us to ask ourselves. A lot of companies right now focus on their cycle time. And a lot of them focus on cycle time from kind of idea intake to execution and release. But a lot of them aren't asking like the true cycle time is the recognition of a need in the market. And so you're going to be getting more data. You're going to have to be upskilling and training your teams on how to use that data. But that true version of agility is that recognition of a need and the ability to go respond to it. And so do you have that in place? Because I think to your point, if you don't have that in place, we could share all the AI insights ever in the world, but they're just going to sit there as insights instead of turning into actions. So any other parting thoughts for us? I think this was great and love the conversation today.
I love it.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much. And we'll sign off as another version of Build What's Next.
Thank you for joining us on Build What's Next, Digital Product Perspectives. If you would like to know more about how Method can partner with you and your organization, you can find more information at method.com. Also, don't forget to follow us on social and be sure to check out our monthly Tech Talks. You can find those on our website. And finally, make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out on any future episodes. We'll see you next time.